Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar all about embedded research and the exciting prospect of an embedded researcher network. My name's Richard Torn.
I'm Felix. Hi.
And I'm Alison Seeger.
And this is a pan-UK webinar today, so it's great to have Vicky in St Andrews. Hello, Vicky.
Hi.
And David in Bangor. Afternoon, David.
Hello.
We really should have thought about the Northern Irish input into this.
Yeah.
It feels like we've sort of slightly let the full UK down. So hopefully it might be someone from Northern Ireland joining. Very welcome if you are. Thank you for giving up your time this afternoon for what I think is going to be a really interesting hour, talking a bit about embedded research, but in particular, how embedded researchers can work well together as part of a network. So we're going to be hearing from a range of our speakers. Thank you so much for joining. But in particular, this is a discussion. So we'd very much like you to join in. We know we've got a fantastic array of people dialing in from all over the country. So thank you so much for doing that. Alison, how can people get involved?
So there are three ways. I'll be monitoring questions from the Ask Question feature. If you want to just send your question in by text, just click the question button and type away. You can email us at hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare or tweet us. We're at _embedded. And we're using the hashtag today, embedded research. So if you have a question and you want it to go up on Twitter, hashtag embedded research.
Alison, thank you very much. And to say that we are recording today's session, you may well be watching the recording. If so, that Ask Question feature is going to be less helpful for you, but you're still very welcome to share your reflections on Twitter or by dropping us an email. So whether you're watching live, whether you're joining later on, it's great to have you with us. It's worth saying that this is the second in a series of webinars. We are doing a loyalty card scheme. If you've been to the first webinar, you can now have a stamp for joining the second. There'll be a cup of coffee if you make it to all 5 by the end of it. So this is the second webinar in a series as part of the NIHR funded embedded research project, which we'll be hearing a bit more from Vicky about later on. If you joined that first webinar, you'll remember it was all about what embedded research is about and some sort of case studies of how embedded research is working in practice. Today's webinar moves us on a chunk in terms of thinking about the different ways which embedded researchers can work together, and so particularly thinking about the potential for a network. So I'm going to be talking a bit about some network theory, one of our big passions here at Kaleidoscope. Vicky is going to be talking a bit about some of the insight from embedded researchers on the ground, and we're going to get first-hand accounts of what it is like to be an embedded researcher from David and from Felix. It sounds like we've got you as like some caged researchers, Felix. Give us your first-hand insights. We're looking forward to that.
You're a guinea pig.
A guinea pig only works better than caged things, doesn't it? Yeah.
Very willing.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. But please do send in your questions, reflections, comments as we go through. So we will start. I will kick off. And so today, as I said, today's focus is it comes from a number of conversations we've had as part of the embedded research project. I know, Vicky, you've been leading about a desire from those working in embedded research projects to learn and share and collaborate across boundaries. Ahead of today's webinar, you will have received a question about what actually would you like a network to offer you. Thank you for all those who did fill that in. Alison, what were people saying when they filled it in?
Yeah, so I got some really nice wordy answers from everyone, which was really helpful and insightful. But what they all boiled down to was people are looking for support, moral or professional, collaboration, so a chance to share their ideas and what they've learned, and feedback, so they can hear from others how they're doing and how they could improve. And we got a whole range of answers, but everything kind of boils down to those 3, and we might get some others from you later on in the webinar.
Okay, through. Lovely, Alison, thank you very much indeed. So what makes a network work? Well, I'm sure everyone joining, whether in their professional or personal or whatever capacity, has been involved in a network of some sort and you might well have been involved at that sort of firework moment when they start. Networks often come together because there's some energy, there's a desire to sort of to work across boundaries, to learn, to share. It can be quite a buzzy moment. We're nodding here. There might be nods going on elsewhere. However, you can continue nodding or otherwise if after a while networks sort of lose some of that, and that initial first flush of enthusiasm might pass. We, as I said, we do a lot of work around networks and learning networks here at Kaleidoscope, and we're particularly interested in a non-morbid way in the death of networks, and actually what causes networks to, in the end, sort of fade away. The common story we come up against, which might chime with people's personal experience, is that networks tend to fizzle. That there's this energy at the beginning, but eventually it ends up fizzling out, looking a bit like these lovely roses here. And so we're fascinated by this question about those networks which don't have that fate, which are able to keep members engaged, keep generating value. What do they look like? So let's just go back to the beginning for a second and think about why that might be. So a quick exercise. So if everyone at home could play along with this, if that's okay, by grabbing a pen, piece of paper, and just take a couple of minutes. We should really have some hold music whilst we have frantic writing. But take a couple of minutes on your own, please, just to answer the following. So what we'd like you to do is just to think about the most effective working relationship you've had with someone from outside your organization. So if everyone can start to picture that, please. And then think about what made it work. And so it's up to you to define most effective. We're looking for sort of personal responses. But think about that most effective working relationship. And then why does it stand out? What did make it work? This is where we'd have the hold music if we'd put in hold music. So it can be from within your current role, previous role, a completely different context altogether. If you could just have a think, what made it work? And then if you can just put that factor, put whatever you've come up with, just in the subject line of an email, and pop that off to hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare. So we won't be. It'd be lovely to see what comes through. We won't be attributing so and so said this, so and so said that. We'd just love to see some of what people put. The non-anonymized bit for this is I'm going to pick on our panelists because we have some willing people here. But if you could just do that, that would be wonderful. So less about the relationship itself, but what made it work? What made it stand out? And what's that key factor? Felix, what's sprung to mind?
Common ground and common interest. So I think it's the emotive connection of having similar family issues at home, children at the same age. So some kind of emotional connection, I guess, and then a common interest as well, work-wise.
Excellent, very good. Vicky, what stood out for you?
I was thinking, for me, it was being in regular contact, and that didn't mean all the time, but just regular enough, even if that was only 2 or 3 times a year. And also just being able to go to this person really when I needed something, and feeling that I could go to that person when I needed something. So there was a relationship based on what was needed at the time. I suppose it was that timeliness, really.
Lovely, great stuff. Thank you very much, Vicky. And David. David, you're muted at the moment. If you want to unmute.
Yeah, there we go. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
You can. Communion, David.
Yeah. Sorry. I would say confidence and trust would be the 2 words for me. So the relationship was built and developed over time, which meant we had a confidence to be open with each other, and then the trust also was a factor of that, enabling us to have really honest conversations about what needed to happen.
David, lovely. Thank you very much, David, Felix, Vicky. Alison, we'll come to both your factor, but also what people are sending through in a second. Mine was mutual respect. Someone having a set of skills which I deeply envy, but there being a sense of sort of both of us bringing something slightly different to their partnership, and there being mutual appreciation of those different skills. Alison, yours first, but also what are people sending to you?
So mine first, I agree with everything that's been said, but I also would like to throw into the mix challenging, but in a good way. Someone that challenges me to go beyond what I would normally do on my own. There's a lot of emails coming in. Thank you. And people are stuffing in 12 words in their titles.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for being so enthusiastic. But we're coming up on things like common vision, goals, trust, listening, face-to-face contact, like Vicky mentioned, energy, easy, accessible contact. Let's see, clarity about roles, skills, and limitations. We have...
Lovely. Great, and still people coming through, getting to know people, meeting people face-to-face occasionally, building trust, finding out about each other's skills and experience. We will compile all of these factors and send them around following today, just as a little mini write-up. Again, we'll anonymize all of those. Thank you, everyone, for doing so. And this is an exercise we do quite a lot at Kaleidoscope. So we can say, look, well, here's one we prepared earlier. This is when we did a similar exercise with a group of NHF board level executives. Again, very similar factors. This concept of trust, respect, shared goals, vision. There's a lot more in there. This is a session we did just last week with a set of mental health trusts. Again, honesty coming through, regular meetings. We've done this a number of times. It is a common set of factors which come through where there's a number of implications from this. One is that we're still waiting for someone to say that what really made that relationship was subsection 3A of their particular contractual framework. It's not normally what jumps out. So there's a lot here which sort of you can absolutely intuit in terms of how we make relationships as normal human beings. Perhaps the challenge for networks is about how you take what we can intuit and make that systematic in a professional context, how we continue to sort of draw the benefits of a range of these factors in a professional setting. And this always leads me to think about a favorite improvement quote of ours, which many people would be familiar, Paul Bertalden being one of the people who said this over the years, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And so when we talk about the importance of trust and common interests and respect and sort of that regular face-to-face interactions, are we designing systems which are going to make those things more likely than not? Which brings us on, if you're going to remember one thing about networks from this very speedy run through, it is this: I'm about to show you the magic bullet behind all networks. So if everyone could just hold on to their hats to reveal that the magic bullet for networks is, there isn't one. And so we spend a lot of time studying networks, both within healthcare, sort of inside the UK, outside healthcare. And we're yet to find anything which indicates that what those factors came up in that exercise are not the secret, the magic bullet to successful collaboration, successful networks. There is no single magic bullet. It is about how you can design a system which does support those factors and is systematically adhered to. How you can prioritize those regular face-to-face contacts, for example, in the light of conflicting pressures. there is not some beautiful secret here, which if only we knew the answer to, everything would be solved. It's about doing a lot of things and continuing to do them. And it's what those things are isn't a particular mystery, but it is about how we hold true to them. So saying that, so some pointers which we've learned about some of the characteristics of successful networks, which we might just want to reflect on over the rest of this session, is that you cannot get away from a very clear, articulated purpose. What is a network trying to do? And that typically being one or two or max three things, rather than a shopping list of and another thing and another thing. So having a clear purpose, which is understood and is focused. Having a theory of change, so actually understanding, well, if we do this thing here, how is it going to result in that outcome over there? And having some measures attached to that, so you can have a conversation about whether that theory is actually holding up or not. Having some basic clarity of roles. We talk quite a lot about the difference between leadership of a network, which needs to come from its members, and management, which is about infrastructure. Quite often these two things get conflicted. So the person who's sending out the agenda, doing that management role, becomes the de facto leadership. These things need to be kept separate to some degree. You need to be clear. Fourth, you need this sort of constant communication, exactly as Vicky's said. You need ways to breathe life and energy into networks, whether that's through digital means or face-to-face or just regular email correspondence, which just enables people to understand what's going on. And then finally, a fact possibly we should own up to a bit more than we do, that all networks must end at some point. Often we think this is such a lovely thing, it must go on forever, but not. We work quite a lot with Becky Morby at London South Bank, who is an international networks guru, who is just adamant that if we try and pretend that our network is forever, that is a sure sign that it's probably not going to last as long as it should do. You must be clear about what you're trying to do, and actually once you've done it, celebrating the success of a network and being prepared to move on. Some quick pointers, and before I move on, just one word of warning, which is in sort of network collaborative circles, you get quite a healthy tension between the role of networks to harness these sort of personal sort of human factors we were talking about earlier, but the need to put some deliberate structure around them. So there is a risk to us talking about networks as being this fantastic organic development, which we should just leave to blossom and see where it goes, which has a lot of truth in. You do not want to over direct a set of relationships which are forming. But if we allow it to be too organic, if we say, well, we'll just step back and just see, there's a risk that actually it sort of never quite gets the structure and that deliberate focus, that purpose, which we see time and time again in networks which have been able to succeed. So by no means throw the organic baby out with the bathwater, but just a word of warning about how you get the most out of networks and their collaborations. Right, I think I will finish there, and we'll come back to some of these concepts about how we apply it to our particular embedded research context shortly. But Vicky, over to you. Vicky, thanks so much for joining. And Vicky, unmute.
Thank you. So I was on mute. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part during this, and thanks so much for talking to us about networks as well. And it's sobering thinking, I think. We're going to think about having an embedded researcher network and what that might look like. So lots of food for thought, which is really useful. So what I wanted to do this afternoon was just tell you a little bit more about some of the work that we've been undertaking, some of the research work that we've been undertaking as part of the Embedded Researchers Project. I'm Vicky Ward. I'm based up here at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, working with a team of researchers, Professor Hugh Davies, Bennett Reid and Tricia Tooman. And we are part of the embedded team. And we are leading the work that is really around looking at the literature around embedded research and around knowledge co-production. And also we are doing a piece of scoping work where we're trying to identify the range of embedded research initiatives which are out there And as some of you may have read on our project website, and if you've actually looked at all our very long NIHR document as well, you might have a sense where we're coming from with this project, which is that we were aware that embedded research was becoming a very popular thing, that it was an increasingly popular term, more and more people seemed to be doing it. But we're also aware that we didn't have a very clear sense of what an embedded researcher is, who an embedded researcher might be, and how they're actually working. So this project was very much designed to help us to unpick and understand that landscape a little bit more. Can I have the next slide, Rich? Thank you. The part of work that I'm going to talk about today was the piece of work where we've been trying to identify and describe embedded researcher initiatives. And my guess is that many of you on the line today will have been part of this work with us. So first of all, a huge thank you to you for taking part in this part of the research. And what we wanted to do in this part of the research was to identify embedded researcher initiatives in operation in health settings across the UK, and describe the features of those initiatives, looking at things like their aims, their objectives, their rationale, structure, content, and outcomes. So the first challenge we had was, how were we going to actually find all of these embedded researchers who may or may not be in operation across the UK? We started with a fairly loose definition because we didn't really know what an embedded researcher was and what they might look like. So we had 3 criteria. We were interested in people who are trained or experienced researchers, who are creating knowledge in a non-academic environment, primarily health, where that knowledge is designed to be directly beneficial to the NHS or the health organisation in which they are embedded or hosted. So fairly broad definitions. We didn't want to get rid of things here. We started off, we went out via email, social media and our networks. So I sent a tweet out that said, we're looking for embedded researchers who can help. And who is one of these, which can have the next slide. Thank you. And we thought that we knew all of the embedded researchers across the UK. We thought that we knew where all the initiatives were. It turned out we didn't. We actually identified 90 distinct, so 90 people came forward, basically saying, hey, I'm an embedded researcher. 19 of those were known by our team. 61 approached us cold, so we didn't know them. So 50 of them came in via email and 11 via Twitter, and then 10 people were also suggested by our key contacts. Now obviously this completely blew our minds because we thought that we knew all 19 that existed in the UK, and it turned out we really didn't. So we had a number of people come forward, but of course, because we'd used quite a loose definition at this stage, we needed to look a little bit more detail and see who actually met that definition. And it turned out that 45 of the initiatives that came forward, and these were not just individuals, but sometimes initiatives and teams of people, 45 of those were in scope using the 2 criteria around knowledge production and around being embedded. Having identified those 45, I then have done interviews with 12 initiatives, so some people from 12 of the different initiatives that we sampled on the basis of them all being quite different to one another, because we wanted to try and get a sense of the variation. And what I'm going to share with you now is some of the insights that have come to us from emailing people who are part of these initiatives, and from me talking with people on the phone and about what they have been doing. So the final slide, Rich. Thank you. So the first insight and the first thing that we obviously came up with was that there are a lot of initiatives and there are a lot of embedded researchers out there. So this was a surprise to us, and I'm guessing it's probably a surprise to quite a lot of you who are on the line as well, because of the second insight, which is that there's limited awareness and connections between initiatives. A lot of people working in embedded researchers initiatives or working in an embedded way just aren't aware of each other necessarily. And I'm pretty sure that, I'm not sure that David and Felix had previously met before today or were aware of each other's work. So it's a really good example of that. There are a huge range of embedded researchers out there. In some of the literature, embedded researchers are described as those people who have a joint contact with an NHS and a university organisation. the work that we've actually undertaken, we found that there are a whole range of employment and supervisory arrangements. Some people are wholly based in NHS or other organisations. Some people have joint contracts. Some people are seconded out from universities to work in a host organisation. So there's lots of variety out there and the ways in which people are working. But the key thing that kept coming through when I was speaking to people, when I was emailing people, was that there is a strong sense of isolation. And we often find that people working in knowledge sharing, in knowledge mobilisation, as I call it, they feel quite isolated. People are working in between spaces and they're not quite sure where they belong, and they don't really know anyone else who does the kinds of things that they do. So that was one of the key things that was coming through. And then finally, the other thing that was coming from that was that there was a real desire from people for peer support and learning. And that's both from researchers and initiative leaders. So people who I was speaking to were saying, oh, yeah, I'd really love to come to something. I'd love to be part of a network. I'd love to come to the webinars. Do keep me updated. I'd love to hear more. So there's a real appetite out there for people being connected and understanding more about how other people are working in this space, really to get away from that sense of isolation and to find that peer support. So I think that's pretty much all I had to say about what we've found so far, but that's why we've decided that having this webinar to discuss really whether a network would be a good idea is probably the next step.
Excellent. Vicky, thank you so much. A lovely, concise overview of a huge amount of work. Thank you very much indeed. If you're joining the webinar because of a sense of isolation, welcome. You're amongst friends, and we'll come to a questions discussion in just a bit. But before we do, it's great to be joined both by Felix and David, part of that embedded research community. Well, I think Felix, you're going to start in terms of telling us a bit about your first-hand experience.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Vicky and the team, for putting this on the map. Thanks to your collaborators, Vicky. Thanks to the NHR for funding it, giving back to the NHS the money they stole. So it's fantastic, fantastic also that I'm supported by our clerk locally to come up here today. And I want to acknowledge my colleague, Julian Elston. So that's he's my fellow researcher in residence. So I think the sense of isolation, I think it's a key part of us being our own individual network on the front line, so to speak, and that's something that is really powerful, the peer relationship. Those are the three things I want to talk about. Is the peer support we've already touched on, about the operational synergies a network could deliver, as well as the strengths in numbers, kind of the political strategic stuff that we could glean from having lots of us pooled together in this. I was prompted to give an anecdote. I first spoke, I saw a webinar as well. So, these are really powerful tools with Martin and others, his collaborators. And I think it was Sonia Bussier. No, it was, I forgot her name, Lynn, at the time, but we had a phone call early, and the one piece of advice he gave me is to share our findings painfully early, to which we almost adhered to. But I think that's a really key element of this is to compromise, to let go, and to share. So that's a principle that really resonated with us both going through the last 3 years of being embedded in Torbay and South Devon NHS Foundation Trust, exploring integrated or person-centered coordinated care models. So we're at the middle ground between evaluation and research around complex system change, as well as researching the research and residence model itself. So the peer-to-peer mentoring support, my experiences with that were from being a member of Senate, contributing or creating an early career researcher network, something that is very much face-to-face, local bound. I've been involved in method-specific networks called the Realist Hive and the Ethnographer's Mood. So you can, in these work really well on an early career researcher level. I think David has another perspective coming from the NHS, or having a long background, but in the NHS, whereas a lot of the researchers that come through the researcher trajectory, it seems, are often junior researchers, idealistic people, naive people like myself as well, that struggle with the culture shock as described by Cecilia and others in the various review and case studies that have been published to put this on the map. So I think this is something really powerful potentially about peer mentoring, providing a pastoral support function that possibly even principal investigators, professors might not immediately have and understand. So something about that protected space, as many people alluded to, I think would be really nice. And then the operational synergies are around, and an example would be reaching out to one of Martin's research and residents, Sonia Busu. We were both working on an NHS ethics application. Everyone who's done one before knows it's painful. But essentially what we did was, we did what every NHS manager do, is the copy and pasting, stealing from other trusts. So essentially we shared our NHS application forms for the IRIS, the online application, and provided the moral the frustration that goes along with being delayed. And that's a big challenge for research and residents, is to keep up with the pace of NHS implementation, but retaining space enough to do good enough research to satisfy both impact and relevance, as well as academic output. And then the third thing is about strength in numbers. I think it's fantastic to be more than just a case study of one, which we often are. And that's a methodological challenge, is how representatives are the findings that we generate. And Vicky's and their collaborator studies are great aspect to that. But I'd love to see reaching out to similar case studies that work in the space of system change, which likely is to happen. I don't know, if you're out there, contact me. Be great to have even one-to-one matches of people that are doing similar things on the same kind of project stages. So I see a lot of potential of refining that with your help as part of the network. And thank you again.
Felix, thank you very much indeed. It's always nice on a webinar to have a plug for other webinars, just to further its use as a way of drawing people together. Felix, thank you. And on to David. Thanks so much for joining.
Hi, thank you. So I'm David Evans. The main part of my career was in the NHS, where I'd worked around the UK and Middle East. My last role was in Manchester and as Director of Adult and Children's Community Services across the city, which also included overseeing the integration of health and social care and the strategic development of performance management of A&E medicine at the Manchester Royal Infirmary. And I made the transition from this hardcore operational delivery to academia into Bangor University, where I am now, and I'm lecturer in healthcare science. And a large part of my role is described as researcher in residence. And initially I was based within a new integrated primary care system in North Wales, and now I've moved next door into a community interest company which works alongside and with the practice. My role was not defined in any way, shape or form, and I was allowed the freedom to consider and develop the role, which has advantages and disadvantages. And I think I fit with Vicky's broader definition of embedded researcher, as I'm neither really technically embedded, so I'm not employed or working as a member of staff in the host organisation, or even technically a researcher. So I'm not collaborating with purely the intent to develop academic and research material. It is, as Vicky has said, it's around generating knowledge wherever it sits. So what I use to maybe summarize the purpose of my role is there to be vanilla but useful. So what I mean by that is I've got operational experience and knowledge, as well as some academic experience to help apply to any problems or opportunities as they come up. But I don't have any prevailing paradigm or focus, be that research or operational, to inform or drive my work. So I've got a level of freedom which is I accept is a luxury. So in essence, my role is to disrupt the traditional patterns of behaviour, uncover and facilitate great ideas from both sides of the divide, be that from academia or in the organisations that I work with. So to answer the question, what do I know now that I wish I'd known before I started? I think I'd certainly say it's hard and it's exhausting. fitting into two different worlds, knowing others are in a similar role would be helpful, and we can see this now. I think the title researcher in residence is not particularly helpful, as it comes with all sorts of odd expectations and implications. And I think the traditional perspectives of how researchers operate and attract funding are so deeply embedded. And I think coming from outside of the academia world into that, it was a real eye-opener to me to understand how some of those systems worked, and when you're outside of that can create a number of challenges when you're performing the role. So for me, what I think there's a need for in terms of the researcher network, I think there's building a narrative that challenges that dominant research paradigm, really challenging a focus on impact. And I know there is increasing focus on impact, but it's how and what do we define what that impact is. And that's helpful because that's a currency I think all partners understand. They might not engage or understand research, but they generally understand impact. And that's where this network, I think, can build that challenge. Also, I think there's something around how we define and measure what the success of an embedded researcher role is, and what's the benefit for whom and why, because that will often influence so significantly what we're doing. And then the other and final bit for me is thinking about how we can support our own and as a group career development. Again, recognizing where we sit between many different organizations with fairly traditional approaches to career development. How do we forge a different path to get the same sense of status and promotion and recognition for the work we do? So that for me are probably the three areas that I'd like to see around the network.
David, thank you very much indeed. Although I'm going to pay some good money now on there, people being all over the country, vanilla flavoured ice cream lovers, going, vanilla is useful. What do you mean, but useful? But I love the description, David. Thank you very much indeed. So we've got about 20-25 minutes left, and so we would love input from all those involved. I know questions already starting to come through. So some of the questions we might want you to think about, or some of the issues you might want to raise, are those around. We've sort of had a range of sort of views about what a network could do, sort of how what it could be aiming to, what gaps it could be aiming to fill. So we'd love your views on sort of what would you personally most want to get out of a network for embedded researchers, but also how do you feel it should operate? And so please do draw on past experience of networks which have managed to give you real value. Alison, for my people, how to get involved?
Yeah, you can use the Ask Question feature by pushing the question button and typing in your question. We've already got a few, and I will respond and let you know that I got your question, so you'll know right away. You can email us at hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare. You can tweet us. Our Twitter handle is _embedded. We're using the hashtag embedded research right now.
Awesome.
Yeah, let us know.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So I wonder, just whilst people are gathering thoughts, I'm going to take chair's prerogative and throw a question to our three speakers, if that's okay. And so we'll go Vicky, then Felix, then David. Apologies, Vicky, that you get minimum thinking time. But we've talked about a whole range of ways a network could be useful. We know from successful networks that they need to be focused. And so if we were having a webinar in a year's time, what one thing, just one thing, would you most like to have seen happen as a result of a network of embedded researchers? So November next year, we'll be into 6 months post-Brexit. I'm sure everything will be going terribly well. What one thing would you most like to have seen happen as a result of embedded researcher network? We'll start with Vicky, then Felix, and David. Vicky.
I think, given my experience of talking to lots of embedded researchers and people who do or don't define themselves as such, David, I think that what I would most like to see is people actually being aware of each other. So what I would like to see is that people have had conversations, whether that's as part of a small group, whether that's a kind of email, one-to-one email, or whatever. I think that what I'd like to see is people like Felix and David actually talking to one another and starting to have that relationship. So it's more about that process and that process of getting to know one another and just knowing that there are other people out there. So I'd like to see, people being aware of each other's work and actually starting to form a sense of community, I think, and some kind of belonging.
Lovely, Vicky, thank you very much.
I totally endorse that. I think face-to-face contact would be awesome, which I think we do in the forthcoming workshops as well. So just getting to know you out there and having conversations. But as an outcome, I think the most important for me is to raise the profile of this approach, of which we all benefit. We can do, on the back of individual conversation, we can do all the stuff that benefits us each individually, in our case, studies or in our work. But if the profile is raised overall as a result of this, that would be terrific.
Lovely, thank you. Felix, David.
I guess I would just pick up one specific element, which for me is just understanding the expertise that's out there, because it will come in so many different shapes and forms. And if in a year I can see that map almost of the country and beyond of where the skills are lying, then that will be really helpful.
Lovely. Thank you very much. All great questions. Just to say we'd very much welcome your input, and it might be about the network, but if you want to use this opportunity to ask very specific questions which others might have the answer to, please do that as well. I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll come to questions. Which one for Vicky? Vicky, you said you were surprised when you sort of came across these 90 initiatives, which many of you weren't aware of. Do you think you've now exhausted the supply? Are there still embedded researchers hidden under a rock, which you're yet to come across?
Yes, absolutely. Our intention was never to exhaust the supply, because, to be honest, it just could have run and run and run. And the more we look into each of these initiatives and you see the shape of them, the more you realise that yes, there are going to be a lot more people out there who might not have. From our initial tweet, they might not have thought of themselves as embedded researchers. They might not have considered what they were doing as part of that. And so there are definitely a lot more people out there who are doing that, particularly people who are employed in NHS organisations as researchers in R&D departments. I've become increasingly aware that there are a lot of those. And there are a lot of people who work in labs, in hospital labs, who have roles around diagnostic techniques within the hospital, but also to develop research and new techniques as well. There are a lot of people out there doing that kind of work who have academic backgrounds, academic skill, academic training, and a connection into the research world, but also who are doing vital and valuable work to bring that expertise into practical service within various kinds of organisations. So definitely a lot more out there, and I'm just glad that we kind of had a point where we finished in terms of timing, and that meant that I could kind of draw a line underneath everything. But yeah, definitely many more out there, I'm sure.
Lovely, Vicky, thank you. The image I've got in my head is a bit like the beginning of one of those superhero films where you've got people in all their different contexts thinking, am I the only one like this? And then they come together and form some squad of Avengers or similar. I'm sure everyone else is thinking exactly the same. Alison, questions flooding in.
Yeah, questions are flooding in. I have a few specific questions that I'll ask to Vicky, and then I'll ask to David and Felix. Vicky, first, you mentioned that there are some researchers in labs. Someone asked, in what other contexts are embedded researchers working? Could you give us some kind of overview of their specialties, how they're placed organizationally? I think people are curious to know who else is on the line.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Vicky, before we go into that one, should we take a couple more just so we can...
Sure, so David and Felix can get thinking.
Yeah.
There's a lot of technical questions about how other researchers are working. So for maybe David and Felix, you can think, how do others manage the massive overheads charged by universities? So a funding question.
Nice, non-controversial, thank you.
Kim asked, I'd like to see a theory of embedded research as a result of collaboration. Is that a reality? Susan said she's keen to raise awareness in the NHS of an embedded researcher model. Is that a possibility of the network?
Lovely, great stuff. Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you all for asking questions. Apologies, Vicky, for cutting you off. So, Vicky, I wondered if you wanted to start, then David, then Felix. Vicky.
Yeah, so I can talk just a tiny bit about the different contexts within which we have identified embedded researchers, but I must say that this is still work in progress, and also that there will be future work which we're going to be sharing much more detail around this and helping people to think about the range of contexts in which embedded researchers can be used. But one of the main insights has been that the researchers who are in these roles are not usually specialists in terms of having a particular healthcare research area. So David mentioned particularly that his role is not, he kind of sits in between lots of roles, and we found a lot of people like that. So the majority of embedded researchers are actually probably would describe themselves as methodologists. So they're people who know how to create knowledge, how to create particular forms of knowledge, how to undertake research. So it's the know-how that people have rather than the know-what about a particular clinical condition, about a particular kind of service. So it's more about being an expert in knowing how to create knowledge than coming up with solutions about how you fix integrated care, for example. So a lot of people are in those kind of contexts. But we've got people working in public health. We've got people who are working in hospital labs. We've got people who are working in various kinds of NHS Trust research and development spaces and organisations. We've got people who are doing evaluation work. So there are actually, there's a big range of people situated in a lot of different settings. But there are a lot of commonalities between those people working in those settings. So it's a broad church, really, in many ways, with lots of variety. But everyone is holding to those core principles of bringing together various forms of knowledge and practical action. So that's what I'd say in terms of who there is out there.
Lovely, Vicky, thank you very much indeed. David, a couple of practical questions, views.
I mean, a couple of things just to add to what Vicky was saying. I'd be really interested to see how we can extend the network to include local authorities and third sector organisations, because the remit and role of managing and supporting health and wellbeing doesn't rest with the NHS alone. And I think actually the barriers and the boundaries between those organisations are as important to explore as the ones that we might be talking about. So I'd really like to see some of that role expand. In terms of maybe that first question around the university overheads, I guess for me, I was in a lucky position that the university were prepared to go at risk with the role, and they had the ability to see that, I guess, the quid pro quo of the arrangement, in a sense that out of the role, we've developed research proposals. We've also supported a range of different funding requests with a range of organisations. So the university sees the value for this and has invested in itself in the role, and therefore isn't a cost to the local health board, because it sees a return on investment through the different research proposals, investment funding, and also different ways of supporting students across the network as well. So I'm able to provide different levels of support. So in terms of this particular context, the university has carried that risk and that cost, which I think is a very, I guess, a lucky position to be in.
David, thank you very much. Felix.
Yeah, I'd add to that point. It's a real. So we're both university employed. We have our funding through a local charity. I don't think the NHI would ever have funded us. We've changed our protocol 6 times over the course of the last 3 years, and it's still evolving. So we've got a bit of funding from them, but I think matched funding is also quite important. So we've got some money from the trust that we are permanently embedded with. And we've also got some money from the clerk that pays for the principal investigators. And I think the match funding facilitates the shared buy-in, but allows you enough independence to not be doing the operational dredge in the NHS. I also totally endorse, so there's something around clerks being a vehicle for that going forward, hopefully, and clearly you've got Jo Ratcliffe-Malone in your corner there at Bangor, and hopefully she'll drive that nationally if she hears us as well. So I think there's something to think about going forward, and including the academic health sciences networks. I think there was a question about that as well. So we're looking to provide an evaluation function potentially that is about research capacity building, which is a core function around that. A theory as a result of the collaboration of networks. I think that's, yeah, like I said, about accumulating the case studies very much in the way that the early papers have done is very good. NHS-based model, we have a link with quality improvement. Often it seems to work through champions. We've got Susan Martin, who is a fantastic quality improvement lead in our trust, and she opens doors. And it's kind of a good place to sit within the organization. Totally endorse David's point. We've been working with the voluntary sector around the integration of care models in community-based settings very successfully, as well as with both councils, Torbay and Devon County Council. In fact, I'm going to the HSJ Awards this evening with some of them. So I think more questions, keep going.
Felix, thank you very much. Alison. Got a whole flood. Thank you very much for saying.
Yeah, we're full of questions. People are really keen to get involved, which is fabulous. And someone has emailed and suggested that we send out a questionnaire to capture answers from other researchers, because I can't possibly capture everyone's answers that are flooding into the questions. Susan said she hopes that the network promotes an understanding by the NHS and other health service providers of the value of an embedded researcher. And sorry, I didn't write down the name of who said this, but a result of the network, she would like to see a list of old hands to help spread the word to skeptical managers. And I think that's a valid point. You probably have a spectrum of embedded researchers with varying degrees of experience that could not only help each other, but help spread the word to others as well.
Alison, thank you very much indeed. So we are we're coming up close on time. So just say if you've got any sort of final comments or questions, which we'll either take in the last 7 minutes or so, or we'll come back to you afterwards. But just to say that I think there's some really common themes coming through in terms of how a network can add value is by sort of creating those conversations, Felix, as you said, in terms of people just being aware of each other, and then this ability to raise the profile of the whole endeavour. So possibly should have said earlier that following this, sort of part of our role working with the embedded team is to think about how this network could develop. And so we'll be putting heads together and trying to come up with probably a small number of ways in which to try and tap the sort of collective wisdom of everyone working on embedded research and wanting to get involved in this way. Alison, time for a couple more comments, questions?
I can, yeah. People are also reporting in on Twitter. CR Stocks Rankin asks, does embedded research require a different kind of ethics that takes into account academic rigor and the realities, or the vulnerabilities and complexities, of practice and community life? It's kind of a complicated question to end on.
And other
It's a really typically deep question from Catherine Rose, so yeah, thank you for that.
Maybe a food for thought for everyone. Let's see, Becky Steele asked what she would like to see from an embedded researcher network is a collaboratively defined benchmark for what good looks like. And we've kind of talked about this, finding a way to measure what success looks like, both in terms of impact and process. For example, make space for learning and development as a must not nice to have.
As a must, not a nice to have. There's a punctuation landmines all over the place there. Alison, thank you very much. We are coming close to time. So we'd still very much welcome comments, reflections, again, whether you're joining live or you are joining later on. You're still very welcome to tweet or to send us emails to hello@kaleidoscope.healthcare. It is fantastic to see the level of enthusiasm and questions people want to share and observations to raise. So thank you very much. Please do keep that coming, and we will find a way to share those back. But I think just as we come to our closing round, it would be great just to go around our different panelists. So I will start just to buy everyone else time. So we'll go to myself, and then Vicky, then to Felix, then to David, then to Alison. Possibly just one reflection from this conversation. And again, thinking about how can a network here be most effective. So I'll start, then Vicky, then Felix, then David, then Alison. A nice back and forth out of the room, and then we will close. So a reflection for me, well, firstly, look, fantastic enthusiasm, fantastic to have so many people joining this call today. The network skeptic, or the network bit of sobering advice, as Vicky put it earlier, is to say that the knack would be about how we focus that enthusiasm and how we pick just a couple of things and do it really well, rather than try and do a dozen things and not work. So the idea about having I think a sort of a questionnaire which just tries to map where all the expertise is, picking up on David's point, I think is something which is really nice, and certainly one we'll be considering following the call. Vicky, one reflection.
I think my reflection is that some of the questions that are coming in and very much go to the core.
Vicky, we're struggling with sound slightly, so we're going to come to Felix, then we're going to come back. Felix, reflection?
I'm just grateful and humbled and enthused by the response already, which is exactly what I already wanted. So we've already won. But I think what's really exciting about this is that we are shifting paradigms here at the middle ground between evaluation research around various methodologies of mixing methods and around the discussion around what is relevant and what is impactful to satisfy all those worlds from which we come. So yeah, really keen to meet you all.
Lovely, thank you. Vicky, we're going to come back and hope speakers' microphones working. Vicky?
Okay, is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we must have just had an internet drop then. My reflections are a lot of the questions that people have been coming up with are very much go to the heart of what we're trying to do in the embedded research project, which is to try and understand what an embedded researcher is, the processes that are involved in embedded research, and really the options that are available to people when they're thinking about doing embedded research. We're not going to be able to come up with answers about what's best to do or what's most effective to do. But there again, I don't think that a network is going to come up with that either, because we're all doing things in different ways and have different impacts in the context within which we're working. But the thing I'm very much struck by is just the enthusiasm by people for the idea of coming together and learning, and just that sense that people have of, oh, I didn't know that there were other people out there doing that. So for me, this webinar has been great, because actually I think it's really raised that message and hopefully got the word out there that you're not alone.
Vicky, thank you so much. David?
For me, again, I've really enjoyed knowing that others are out there. I'm not sure vanilla but useful is ever going to be a superhero tagline. See what happens on that. I think, and I absolutely agree with Vicky, so there isn't one way to solve this. But what I would like to do, we probably need to push and have a little bit of an edge over the next 12 months, which is what would success look like? Because there's a real danger that in 12 months we could still be talking about the stuff that we're doing that's really good, but actually we haven't really defined what success really looks like in a way to then challenge funders, organisations around us. That's what I'd be really keen to see that we can develop.
Dave, that is a lovely point. Alison, we're going to come to your reflection and to let us know what happens after today.
Okay, first the reflection. I was over here furiously trying to manage questions, so the enthusiasm is just, I mean, Vicky warned us, but she was right. You guys are enthusiastic, and they're questions that even amongst the 5 of us, we can't answer. It takes a group. And I think that's what really came through to me, is that it needs the group of you together. It's more than a one-on-one. It's more than individual. It's really, it depends on the group. And so going forward, group, the next webinar is on January 21st. It's from 2 to 3 p.m. and it's designing an embedded research initiative, insights and options. I don't think you've been sent invites yet, but I'll be on that soon. And if you've been enjoying the embedded webinars thus far, and seems they're being enjoyed, join us to learn more about how to design an embedded research initiative. Get your thoughts heard so it goes smoother from the beginning, and you can contribute your experience to that.
Awesome, thank you very much indeed. Just to say, webinars are a bit of a funny format in terms of you have speakers, but you don't have an audience. Why can we just give a round of applause to our speakers? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, David, for joining. Thank you, everyone, for giving up an hour of your time to be with us this afternoon. All further information about the Embedded Project, embeddedresearch.org, and we look forward to seeing you at a future webinar. Thanks very much, all. Have a good afternoon.